Hello, welcome to DataBank CISO Corner podcast, where we discuss cybersecurity from the CISO's perspective. I'm Dane Dittamore, Solutions Marketing Director at DataBank, and I'll be your host. For our podcast is really for CISOs and security practitioners, those who want a quick scoop, 10 to 15 minutes, and those who want to hear from the experts who do this every day. With me today, I've got Mark Houpt, who is indeed an expert in DataBank's CISO. Good afternoon, Mark.
Good afternoon, Dane. Thanks for bringing me on board.
Great to have you. As many of our listeners already know, Mark's DataBank CISO. He's head of our security department and all things related to security and compliance throughout the company. Today in episode 1, which is our debut, by the way, we're going to be talking about 3 topics today that I'm sure every CISO and security practitioner is interested in. The first one is nation-state sponsored attacks. Secondly, CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And finally, everyone's not so favorite topic, ransomware. And we have 2 special guests with us today that I'm sure everyone is going to want to hear from. And we've got Calli Schlientz and we've got Tyler Treat. Calli, Tyler, say hello.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Hey there.
Calli is DataBank's one of DataBank's compliance engineers, and Tyler Treat is a security architect for DataBank. So, Mark, let's kick it off. Talk to us a little bit about nation-state sponsored attacks, kind of, state of the union there, and kind of what you're thinking.
Oh, State of the Union, lovely. So, nation-state sponsored attacks. It's something that we mask. We don't actually point out that nation states are attacking us. We mask it with the term APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat. Actually, to be fair, we don't mask it that. That's what the federal government has designed or defined it as, in order for them not to actually point the finger at these nation states. But if you sit down and you look at the landscape, if you will, the geopolitical situation in the world, there's really 3 or 4 sources of nation state APTs that are occurring right now. There's obviously the North Korean type of situation, which is pretty traditional hacking. They're responsible, and they've been attributed publicly to the Sony media hack that occurred back in 2014, 2015 timeframe. You've got North Korea, which is been in kind of a duel, if you will, with both the United States and Israel, and both of our sides have been back and forth with various types of events, if you will. The U.S. side has been known to have placed pieces of malware, if you will, inside of the nuclear program inside of Iran. And just within the past couple of days, we learned that some of Iranians' surrogates were able to use various types of malware that are associated with social media to infiltrate Israeli defense forces. They used young ladies to befriend, shall we say, young men of the Israeli Defense Force. Those young ladies then passed off through social media certain types of links that allowed for the Iranians and others to track the phones of the Israeli Defense Force personnel, and even go so far as to turn on recording, and both video and audio within those phones. So this APT type of situation between Iran, the United States, and Israel is a very large thing going on right now. And then we have, of course, China versus the United States, or really China versus the world. And in China's case, they're after intellectual theft type of situations, intellectual property predominantly. Also been attributed to taking data from the U.S. federal government with the OPM hack, which led to the Anthem hack, which led to the Marriott hack, and even recently announced was related to the Equifax hack that occurred within the last couple of years. So whereas the Iranians are doing it from a military perspective, the Chinese are doing the attacks more related to gaining intellectual property or trying to follow particular individuals around, finding out where they sleep, which cities they're in, and so on and so forth, to kind of be able to use that data to determine what kind of intellectual property or systems that they need to attack from there. And then we have our old adversary, as would be said in the movie Hunt for Red October. We have the Russians, and of course the Russians are doing the very traditional hacking. They're looking to get into our various military systems, as well as our financial, and into more importantly, our critical infrastructure type of systems. In other words, our power grid. Kind of from the perspective that if they need to, at some point, they could activate these malware situations, or they could activate things that would backdoors and things like that would allow them to shut down. So we have those four big threats out there. We've seen them active in the world over the past couple of years. Very, very active, as a matter of fact, and we have to be cognizant of that as we move forward. And one of the things that we need to be careful of as security practitioners is properly assessing the intelligence information that is in front of us. One of the things is actually what I just talked about, the attributions of and the targets of the different types of activities of the companies that we were just, or the countries, I should say, that we were just discussing. You know, a lot of people, a lot of CISOs, a lot of security practitioners did not know, or do not know, when I talked to them, the attributions, if you will, that we just talked about, and the targets that these various APTs are after. And, you know, being able to properly analyze the intelligence that's in front of us will allow us to understand whether our companies are at risk, and whether or not we need to heighten our own defenses. So a perfect example of that is this past January, right after the drone strike on Mr. Soleimani, who was a fairly high-ranking official with the Republican Guards in Iran. The news media immediately launched out there, said, hey, the Iranians are going to attack us through cyber world. The federal government got involved in it, but if you carefully read what the federal government stated, they said, yes, you should be prepared for it. Those are things that we should always be prepared for, but they really didn't necessarily heighten the alert. And the reason for that is because the intelligence analysts were saying that the Iranians, contrary to what the media was saying, the government intelligence analysts were saying that the Iranians were going to be after blood in their response. And that is very true. And we ended up seeing them fire the missiles, and the whole situation backed down. But the initial attack, because of what we did in drawing blood with Mr. Soleimani, the culture of Iran, which needs to be taken into consideration when we're dealing with intelligence information, intelligence data, that culture needs to be taken into consideration so that we can understand how the cyber attacks may occur. And in this case, the Iranians are very much a blood for blood type of situation. So we needed to ensure that we analyze that data correctly. So there's a little bit of a primer on nation state sponsored attacks, and some things you should be aware of with that.
Yeah, that's really a good point, Mark. So would you say, if you were to kind of give your input or whatever, you kind of need to know what the motivations are, the cultural motivations, because it would appear that someone like China is more after our intellectual property more so than the contrary with someone like Iran.
That's right. So somebody like Iran doesn't have a problem with punching you in the nose or getting right up into your face, whereas China realizes that they're a big country, we're a big country. We also depend on one another economically. Right. So they're not going to do things overtly. They're going to do things a little bit more covertly, and they're also not going to do things military to military so much as they're going to go after not only some of the low-hanging fruit, but some of the intellectual property, so that they can have their military up to speed if and when ever needed.
Yeah. So the bottom line is understanding the motivations. It may be very well different than corporate motivations, where ransomware, of course, or a topic like that, which we'll get to, they're really after your money, right? It's pretty
Right.
obvious.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. Well, they're after they're after your money, but they're actually after the intellectual property portion of it. Whereas the Russians, in a ransomware type of situation, which a lot of those are attributed to Eastern Europe and mob type of activities with Russians or Eastern Europeans, they're actually after the physical dollars. And so, yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
You have to understand the culture. You have to understand the intent and motivation behind something.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, hey, let's move on to our next topic, CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. And Calli, kind of bring us up to speed.
So CCPA is the California Consumer Privacy Act, and it went into effect January 1st of this year. So it's only been into effect about 6 weeks, and there's still a lot developing. There's a lot of amendments coming out. There's a lot of changes that are being made, things that are being pushed through legislation in California. Part of that, I think, stemmed from the release of GDPR in recent years and how that is effective in the United States. California is what we're talking about right now, but there's a lot of other states that are either in the process of or already have some sort of privacy amendment in place and a privacy act in place, including ones that we're going to be see coming in the next few months, next few years, that are leading out of that. One of the things that we can do to kind of prepare for it is to treat every state in the way that we're treating California to an extent. So obviously this relates specifically to California consumers, and what exactly does that mean? Who is that? How do we make sure that we're meeting that? And recently they released an amendment that stated, or that included employees into that. If your company has employees in the state of California, they are in effect consumers, even though they may not be purchasing anything or participating in any data gathering within your company. They have been rolled into that overall umbrella. So any company like ours, for example, who has employees across the country, we're now, whether we do business in California or not, we're now doing business in California because of that. So it's something that we all kind of need to be aware of and look at what it is and how we can comply with it.
So Calli, in the original CCPA, what was the trigger, if you will, for having to comply with CCPA? Was it, it's defined as the Consumer Privacy Act. So was it somebody who was a resident of California, somebody who visits California, somebody who happens to drive through or fly through California? Who was the target of the CCPA?
A consumer was being defined as a resident of California. So it wouldn't include if you were just, had a layover in California, you're not then included automatically as a consumer, but it would be defined as a person who's actually residing in the state of California.
So basically somebody who's paying taxes to California is considered the subject, if you will, of the CCPA then.
Correct. And that would be even if it was on a temporary basis. So you may not be a permanent resident of California, but you're on assignment there, or military stationed there, things like that, that would still be considered temporary residency in California.
And then, so Calli, does that also apply to businesses that do business in California? You need to make sure that their information is private?
Absolutely, yes.
Right. Okay. Just wanted to kind of note that. And also initially, I know that when HIPAA kind of went into effect in the early years, it really didn't have much of any teeth to it. Really weren't any penalties. And of course, that's changed now. Are we seeing the same sort of thing with this, or are there some teeth and some price to pay for non-compliance?
I think that we're going to start seeing some teeth. We're going to start seeing some court cases go into effect. There are grounds for lawsuit and things of that nature in non-compliance with CCPA. And so I think that over the next few years, we'll start seeing some decisions made within the court system, and it'll start having some real teeth as to how we need to change our practices to comply.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, hey, I know that I want to kind of move on, get to ransomware, and I thanks for that update, and we'll look for another update here maybe during our next podcast on that, because I know that it's kind of maturing as we go along. So Tyler?
Yeah, I think the lawsuits on that are even starting to trickle in a little bit, aren't they?
They are.
And of course, with a state like California, we can expect that, I would think, right?
Yeah,
so that kind of goes along with the culture of a nation state, the culture of a specific state within the U.S. But it seems like they're kind of driving it. And like you say, Calli, my personal opinion, and not that I need to interject a personal opinion, but it would appear that, you know, there will kind of be some overflowing some states that kind of tag on to that, if you will, and then it probably will proliferate from there.
Well,
absolutely. We're already seeing that with Washington right now, and kind of the differences in their proposed Privacy Act in relation to
let's say Washington State, to be specific.
Yes, I'm sorry, Washington State.
Because I was actually in Washington, D.C. last week talking to multiple senators and their aides who are drafting U.S. federal privacy laws that are being put in place. So that's probably a point of discussion for a future episode, but it is coming nationwide, is my point.
We're absolutely headed there. Yep.
Yeah. So would you, once it starts to do that, would it be similar in kind of form and format to what the EU is doing? Do you think?
I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. Okay.
I think the U.S. kind of tends to have a different worldview compared to the Europeans in a lot of ways, but I think that's shifting over time as, you know, the big scandalous data breaches and things like that have happened.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, let's move on here. Let's talk a little bit about ransomware. Tyler, good morning. How are you? And tell us a little bit of what's. I seem to get an email like every day, you know, telling us about. So it's not only a hot topic; it's just pervasive, and they start going after K-12, and they start going after our kids. You know, this is a personal thing now. It's no longer just a one-off thing. This is just a pervasive thing that's happening now.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting a lot worse, and it's every day. There seems like there's a new angle. But of the type of targets they're going after. The big thing is you've got some different schools of thought. There's outfits that are going after people just for the destructive value, which is frustrating to say the least. They're out there to scatter chaos. I think that was in another discussion Mark had at one point in time here not too long ago, talking about chaos. The other thing, obviously the actual ransomware, they want Bitcoin, things to that effect. And so what we're seeing a lot of is certain scenarios where, people either haven't fully hardened their systems, haven't fully patched their systems, don't have proper controls in place. If you're wanting to protect yourself, do you want to take the time and do it right? Or do you want to be reactionary and, rely on a lot of prayer and backups? And in that case, I mean, if you're not willing to go down the path of, I want to do this right, I want to do my vulnerability scans, I want to make sure all of my software is patched to the latest available patches. Do I want to make sure I've got a proper firewall in place? All of these things that are considered pretty baseline things in most organizations, but you would be surprised where they're not. And it's really unfortunate. You know, a lot of these scenarios, it's if you're not taking standard security services seriously, security best practices seriously, you're going to be a ripe target for a ransomware attack. The what else have we got?
So Tyler,
Yeah,
have you
things
seen
like-
the? Go ahead. Sorry.
you know, things like RDP open to the world is shockingly still somewhat abundant. I just don't understand. You know, with all of the vulnerabilities that have been released for Microsoft products, you know, that are specifically targeting RDP, and there's certain people who haven't found fault in having that open to the world, and it's almost always due to it's either convenience or ignorance, and a lot of the time. They don't want to have to take that extra step of going, you know, something simple like a VPN to have to get to their server if they want to RDP to it. You know, and then that just leaves you ripe for lots of bad actors, so to speak, to just start pegging away at your servers.
So
And
Tyler, have you seen a huge increase or a minimal increase, or what's the current landscape of ransomware as far as the attacks are occurring over the past, you know, year, 6 months, or whatever? What's the status of that?
right now, what I've seen is over the last probably quarter or two, it's really ramped up. It was kind of a, I don't know, they call it like a bell curve. It was ramping up, and it was getting some press, and then all of a sudden, it seems like in the last 2 quarters, it's just exploded. Just in the events that we're seeing. You know, a lot of them are end user related. You know, if you don't have proper segmentation in your network, if all of your workstations and servers, you know, if your end user can open an email, get ransomware on one machine, and it starts spreading, you know, spreads like wildfire, be it SMB share or however, there's countless ways, or if it's just propagating via emails and address books. And then all it takes is one user in your environment to get infected, and it, you know, jumps the fence into your server environment, and then, you know, it's game over. You're going to backups and praying. You know, hopefully you've tested your backup and recovery strategy as part of your weekly, monthly operations, things like that.
So you're saying that ransomware is actually recoverable. It's not the you know, I've been defeated, I might as well just walk away and give up the white flag. You're saying that ransomware is recoverable with backups?
Well, there's an asterisk there. The provided your backups, you know, it's not a kind of a time bombed type deal where you've also either through various means your backups have become encrypted, or they also contain the encrypted data was backed up through a different system, things like that. But, you know, assuming you can restore, it's recoverable. Assuming you can prevent it from happening again, it can be recovered. You know, there's a lot of ifs, you know, that go back to having solid processes in place. Yeah, again, to harp on it, making sure you have good backups that you do test. You know, I'll say a vibrant AV platform. You know, a lot of the new generation platforms are detecting this type of stuff on the fly and shutting it down. It's not foolproof. You know, just like the AVs can adapt, so can the adversaries. You know, the other things. Again, don't do dumb things like have RDP open to the world or SSH. You're just going to make yourself a target for brute forces.
Sure.
Would you say, Tyler, that what you've seen are kind of what you would call rookie mistakes, or things that are kind of preventable, or is that really is that indeed a majority of what you're seeing, or is it a minority?
I think it depends on the scope of the businesses you're looking at. The bigger businesses, bigger entities are going to have bigger, more complex problems, but they may all tie back to a single individual opening a malicious email that links to a OneDrive that contains a malicious file that you download, and then you execute that, boom, you're done. And then you shift it, and then it turns into how fast can my team shift to containment mode and get this thing locked down before it spreads to all of my systems instead of just some of them.
Right. Well, hey, that's a great overview of ransomware, or update on ransomware. And again, lots of good things that we can cover in our next episode. But I do want to kind of wrap up. So I want to thank everybody today. Mark, Calli, Tyler, thanks a lot. And I also want to let our audience know, obviously, you can connect with us directly on LinkedIn. We all have LinkedIn accounts. And then if you'd like to contact the security department here at DataBank, CISO at databank.com via email. And everyone have a wonderful and productive day, and be safe, stay secure, and we'll talk to you next time.